music, the best of times.
Here's something no one really warns you about the 1980s. Some of the most controversial movies of the decade weren't horror films or cult classics. They were animated. Movies that looked like kids' entertainment ended up getting banned, censored, pulled from TV, or quietly buried once adults actually paid attention. We're talking graphic violence, sexual imagery, psychological horror, and stories so heavy they unsettled adults more than kids. Today, we're counting down 10 animated movies from the 1980s that were banned or restricted, and how animation briefly became something no one knew how to handle. And yes, number 3 nearly destroyed Disney animation entirely. If you enjoy breakdowns like this, you can support the channel with super thanks. And I've linked the official DVD releases below so you can watch these films uncensored. Let's start with a movie that looks cute and absolutely isn't. At number 10, The Brave Little Toaster, 1987.
No one here would be so bold to present you as and no one told you. Let us take you to the cutting edge.
The reason The Brave Little Toaster caused so much trouble is simple. Nobody thought to question it. It looks friendly, warm, and harmless. Talking appliances, a soft color palette, a cozy, almost sleepy tone. This is the kind of movie parents put on without even checking the title. But once you actually watch it as an adult, it becomes very clear why so many broadcasters quietly stopped airing it for kids. At its core, this movie is about abandonment. Not the fun, temporary kind where everything works out by the end, but the uncomfortable idea of being left behind and not knowing if anyone is coming back for you. The appliances weren't lost by accident. Their owner moved on, and the film never rushes to reassure you that this doesn't matter. Instead, it leans into that feeling. There's a scene where the air conditioner doesn't just break down, it has a full emotional breakdown, screaming about being obsolete, unwanted, and replaceable before overheating and exploding. It's played seriously, there's no joke to soften it. Then there's the nightmare sequence, which feels completely unhinged compared to the rest of the movie. A fireman clown, flashing lights, distorted imagery. It doesn't advance the plot. It just exists to make you uncomfortable. And then you get to the junkyard scene. Cars sing cheerfully while being crushed. Machines accept destruction as inevitable. One character intentionally drives itself into a compactor in a moment that many viewers still interpret as a suicide metaphor. That scene is where The Brave Little Toaster crossed the line for a lot of networks. The movie wasn't officially banned. Instead, it started disappearing from children's TV blocks in the late 80s and early 90s. No announcements, no controversy headlines, it just stopped airing. Parents weren't calling stations saying their kids were scared. They were calling because their kids became unusually quiet afterward. And for broadcasters, that reaction was far more concerning than fear. Number 9, The Last Unicorn, 1982.
I am the only unicorn there is. The last?
The Last Unicorn is one of those movies that doesn't scare you while you're watching it. It just sort of sits with you afterward. At first, it feels calm, almost sleepy. The animation is soft, the music is gentle. There's nothing loud or aggressive about it. Parents watching from across the room probably thought it was one of the safer options on TV. What they didn't realize is that the entire movie is built around ideas kids weren't usually exposed to in the early 1980s. This story is about extinction, about being the last of something, about realizing that time has already moved on without you. The unicorn isn't just lonely, she's existentially lonely. She slowly understands that her kind has vanished, and that realization isn't treated as a temporary problem that can be fixed by the final act. It's permanent. Some things are gone, and that's just reality. Even immortality, which in most fantasy stories is presented as a gift, feels like a curse here. The unicorn can't fully connect with anyone because she exists outside of time. Mortality, on the other hand, isn't romanticized either. It's frightening and painful in its own way. There's no clear villain to defeat and no clean emotional reset at the end. The ending gives you a resolution, but not comfort. Things change, but they don't magically become better for everyone involved. After early broadcasts, several networks quietly reduced airings or moved the film out of children's programming slots. Not because of violence or inappropriate imagery, but because kids kept asking questions adults weren't prepared for. Questions about death, about aging, about losing something and never getting it back. The movie didn't explain those feelings. It didn't guide kids through them. It just presented them and moved on. And that made people nervous. At number 8, Rock and Rule, 1983.
Easy on the polyesters, guy.
What will the signal be for your eyes to see?
Rock and Rule is a perfect example of what happens when animation refuses to pretend it's for kids. This movie doesn't tiptoe around its themes. It dives straight into sexual imagery, drug references, nihilism, and satanic symbolism, all wrapped in loud music and aggressive visuals. The villain is a rock star who wants to summon a demon using sound. Not metaphorically, literally. The problem wasn't that the movie existed. The problem was where it kept ending up. Because it was animated, people assumed it belonged in family-friendly spaces. It didn't. And every time it landed somewhere like that, backlash followed. In some regions, Rock and Rule was initially given an R rating, which already put it in an awkward position. Then came re-edits. Scenes were cut, dialogue was altered, entire sequences were removed in an attempt to make it acceptable for wider audiences. But it never worked. Even in its censored versions, the tone was unmistakably adult. The themes were too explicit, the imagery too aggressive, the energy too confrontational. Eventually, many television networks just refused to air it at all. Not because it broke a single rule, but because it broke the unspoken expectation that animation should be safe by default. Rock and Rule wasn't banned in a dramatic way. It was rejected slowly, region by region, until it had nowhere left to go. It became one of the first reminders that animation wasn't allowed to grow up unless the industry was ready to grow with it. Number 7. Fire and Ice, 1983.
And legend, the world trembles before the power of Necron.
Unlike some movies on this list, Fire and Ice never tried to sneak anything past anyone. It didn't hide its intentions behind metaphor or implication. From the very first scenes, it's clear exactly what kind of world this movie wants to show you. It's a brutal fantasy setting filled with monsters, constant danger, and extremely sexualized imagery, all animated in a style that leaves very little to the imagination. Female characters are almost always framed through a sexual lens, not as part of the story, but as part of the visual language. Violence is frequent, direct, and never softened with humor or cartoon exaggeration. And none of this was accidental. This was the point of the movie. Fire and Ice was deliberately designed to feel raw, adult, and aggressive, more like a fantasy comic book than a children's film. The problem was that in the early 1980s, animation still carried an automatic assumption of being appropriate for younger audiences. So even though the movie itself wasn't pretending to be safe, it kept ending up in places it didn't belong. Television networks tried to air it anyway, usually during daytime or early evening slots, and that's where the trouble started. Parents complained, broadcasters panicked, different regions attempted edits, cutting shots, reframing scenes, or trimming moments they thought crossed the line. But the core issue never went away. You couldn't censor Fire and Ice without fundamentally breaking it. The sexual tone and violent imagery weren't isolated moments that could be removed. They were baked into the movie's identity. Eventually, most broadcasters stopped trying. There was no public ban, no dramatic controversy cycle. The movie simply disappeared from kid-friendly programming and stayed there. And this movie was simply controversial because it refused to compromise with expectations animation wasn't ready to escape yet. At number 6, The Plague Dogs, 1982.
When I reach the end, you know I'll find a friend.
This is the point on the list where things stop being edgy or controversial and start being genuinely hard to watch. The Plague Dogs follows two dogs who escape from an animal testing facility, and the movie makes a very clear choice early on. It's not going to soften what that means. There's no comforting distance between the audience and the subject matter. You see experimentation, you see fear, you see confusion, and most importantly, you see how little control the characters have over what's happening to them. From the beginning, the tone is bleak, not dark in a stylized or dramatic way, but heavy in a slow, grinding sense. The movie doesn't rush, it sits with suffering. It lets moments linger longer than most animated films ever would, especially ones that might be watched by children. And it never reassures you that things will turn out okay. What really caused problems, though, was the ending. There's no triumphant escape, no emotional release, no clear victory that makes everything feel worth it. The film ends in a way that's ambiguous, hopeless, and deeply unsettling, even for adults. A lot of viewers didn't walk away feeling shocked, they walked away feeling drained. In the United States, The Plague Dogs was heavily cut for distribution. Entire scenes were removed, and the tone was softened wherever possible. Even then, many broadcasters refused to air it at all. This wasn't parents complaining that their kids were scared, this was adults struggling to sit through it themselves. The Plague Dogs became infamous not because it broke censorship rules, but because it refused to comfort its audience. And for children's animation in the 1980s, that refusal was almost unforgivable. At number 5, Heavy Metal, 1981. Let's be very clear about one thing before going any further. Heavy Metal did not accidentally end up on the wrong list. It knew exactly what it was doing. The problem was that the world around it didn't. In the early 1980s, animation still carried this automatic assumption of safety. Even when a movie was clearly marketed toward adults, the fact that it was animated caused confusion. Video stores didn't always shelve it correctly. Cable networks didn't always schedule it responsibly. And parents didn't always read past the cover. That's where the backlash came from. Because Heavy Metal is aggressively adult. It's filled with explicit nudity, sexual violence, drugs, graphic death, and a worldview that is deeply cynical. Entire civilizations are wiped out. Characters exist purely to suffer. There's no moral center holding anything together. And the tone never softens. This isn't a movie that slips one questionable scene past you. It's relentless. Scene after scene pushes boundaries further, almost daring regulators to stop it. In several countries, Heavy Metal was outright banned. In others, it was restricted to adult-only distribution or cut so heavily that entire story segments barely made sense anymore. Some regions allowed it only in private sales, clearly labeled and separated from other animation. What really accelerated the bans, though, was exposure. Kids stumbled across it on late-night TV. Parents rented it by mistake. Hookup culture around animated sci-fi brought the wrong audience entirely. And once complaints started pouring in, broadcasters panicked because there was no easy fix. You couldn't censor Heavy Metal into something safe. The violence wasn't incidental. The sexuality wasn't decorative. It was the movie. After that, it became a warning sign. Proof that animation could go so far into adult territory that regulators would rather remove it entirely than explain why cartoons weren't safe anymore. At number 4, Akira, 1988. By the time Akira reached Western audiences, censorship boards were already uneasy about animation. There was a growing sense that things were slipping out of the neat boxes regulators were used to working with. Akira didn't push against that discomfort, it blew straight through it. This movie doesn't ease you into its world at all. It drops you into the chaos and never really gives you a moment to breathe. There's intense violence, but that's almost secondary to how disturbing the film feels on a deeper level. The city is unstable. Authority figures lie constantly. Governments are secretive, paranoid, and barely holding themselves together. Children are used as test subjects, not hinted at, shown. Their bodies change in ways that feel painful to watch rather than exciting or fantastical. Power doesn't come with heroism here. It comes with loss of control, fear, and destruction. And the movie refuses to slow down and explain itself in a comforting way. That ambiguity terrified censors. In multiple countries, Akira was banned outright or released only in heavily edited versions. Some cuts removed entire body horror sequences. Others rewrote dialogue to soften political themes. In a few places, the movie never received a proper theatrical release at all. What scared regulators wasn't just the gore. It was the message underneath it. This was an animated movie openly saying that institutions fail, power corrupts, and children suffer because of adult decisions. And it didn't tell the audience how to feel about any of it. There was no lesson, no moral wrap-up, no reassurance that order could be restored. For audiences raised on animation as something instructional or comforting, Akira felt genuinely dangerous. It didn't guide you, it didn't protect you, it didn't resolve things neatly. It just ended. Once Akira entered the conversation, censorship boards realized something unsettling. Animation could now explore ideas that live-action films often struggled to get approved. Once that door opened, it never fully closed again. At number 3, The Black Cauldron, 1985.
Nice and tender. Stop that, you...
This is the movie that made Disney panic. Not because it failed creatively, but because it broke the unspoken agreement Disney had with parents, that a Disney animated movie might get emotional, but it would always feel safe. The Black Cauldron didn't. This movie is dark in a way Disney animation had never been before. Not quietly sad or dramatic, but visually and thematically unsettling. Undead soldiers rise screaming from the ground. Characters are dragged into shadows and never return. The imagery lingers in a way Disney films usually avoided. And then there's the Horned King. He doesn't joke, he doesn't soften, he doesn't get a charming villain song or a friendly defeat. He's relentless, cruel, and genuinely frightening, even to adults. For kids, he was overwhelming. Children were actually scared. Parents noticed immediately, and complaints came fast. In several countries, The Black Cauldron was banned or heavily restricted, especially from children's programming. In the United States, Disney did something it had never done before. They cut their own movie after release. Entire scenes were removed in later versions because executives realized they had gone too far without fully understanding what they were making. Internally, the studio didn't even know who the movie was supposed to be for anymore. It wasn't gentle enough for kids, but it still carried the Disney name. The backlash hit hard, financially, creatively, and emotionally. At one point, Disney animation was genuinely at risk of shutting down. For years afterward, Disney avoided darkness almost completely. Villains became safer, stakes became lighter, emotional risk disappeared. The studio entered one of the most cautious periods in its history. The Black Cauldron didn't just get censored, it scared Disney away from experimentation and reshaped the studio for an entire generation. At number 2, Watership Down, 1978, banned throughout the 80s.
I'll take care of it, Holly.
Look, Bigwig, when have I ever asked to see the Chief Rabbit before?
Watership Down didn't really become infamous when it first released. That happened later when it started showing up on television during the 1980s, often in the middle of the day, surrounded by perfectly normal kids programming. On paper, it looked harmless. Animated rabbits, green hills, a quiet, almost gentle opening. If you were a parent glancing at the screen, there was nothing about it that suggested this was a bad idea. Then the movie actually unfolds. The violence isn't exaggerated or cartoonish. Rabbits suffocate in tunnels. Blood is shown. Animals tear into each other. Entire groups are wiped out, and death is treated as something final, not dramatic or symbolic. Characters don't bounce back. There's no reset button. What really unsettled people was the tone. The film doesn't explain the violence away or frame it as fantasy. It doesn't reassure the audience or step in to soften what's happening. Things occur, they hurt, and the story moves on without apology. Kids absorbed that differently than adults expected. Once parents realized what their children had watched, complaints started piling up. Across multiple countries, Watership Down was gradually pulled from daytime television. Some regions banned it from children's slots entirely. Others tried editing it, cutting scenes and trimming moments, but the emotional weight never really went away. For a lot of viewers, this movie marked a turning point. It was the moment animation stopped feeling automatically safe, not because it was shocking, but because it was honest in a way no one was prepared for from a film about rabbits. At number 1, The Secret of NIMH, 1982.
Move it.
Not while I'm keeping watch.
Andy, true. I'm not afraid.
The Secret of NIMH caused more complaints than almost any animated movie of the 1980s, largely because of one simple mistake. It was marketed directly to children. Parents didn't stumble into this movie by accident. They were told it was appropriate. It looked like a standard animated adventure. And then it started showing things most kids' movies simply avoided at the time. Laboratory experiments, needles, blood, rats being tested on, characters dying without swelling music or reassuring dialogue. Danger isn't stylized or softened. It's treated as real. And once something goes wrong, the movie doesn't pretend it didn't happen. That tone caught people off guard. Parents weren't expecting an animated film to linger on fear the way this one does. The movie rarely pauses to explain emotions or guide the audience toward a comforting takeaway. It assumes children can follow along even when things get uncomfortable. Broadcasters quickly started receiving complaints. Some networks removed it from children's programming entirely. Others only aired heavily edited versions that stripped out key scenes, even though those scenes were central to the story. What made The Secret of NIMH unsettling wasn't just the imagery. Plenty of films had dark moments, but it was the attitude behind it. The movie assumes kids can handle fear, loss, and uncertainty without being protected from it. Courage doesn't guarantee safety. Good intentions don't prevent harm. Sometimes characters survive, sometimes they don't. In the early 1980s, that approach felt deeply unsettling, and that's why this film left such a lasting impression.
Someone strong should be protecting my children in case that tractor starts up again.
None of these movies set out to be banned. They were made during a brief moment when animation stopped pretending it had to be safe. Once that illusion broke, no one really knew how to put it back together. If you want to revisit these films the way they originally existed, don't forget to check the official DVD releases below, with no TV edits or missing scenes. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, you can support the channel with super thanks. Leave a comment with the animated movie that unsettled you as a kid in a way you couldn't explain at the time. Chances are you weren't imagining it. We'll see you next time.